At 3:17 that afternoon, my daughter erased me from her wedding with 6 words: "Your seat is no longer needed." I remember the exact time because I was standing beneath the crystal chandelier in the ballroom of the Maribel Coast Hotel in Naples, Florida, holding a small velvet box in my left hand and my invitation in the right, trying to understand why the front row looked wrong. The ocean was just beyond the tall glass windows, bright and blue, and almost cruel in how beautiful it was. White roses covered the aisle. A string quartet played something soft near the terrace doors. Guests moved around me in silk dresses and navy suits, laughing like nothing sacred had just been taken apart. My name is Margaret Whitmore, and I was 69 years old the day my only daughter decided I no longer belonged where a mother should sit. I had arrived early, because that is what mothers do. I wanted to make sure Emily had eaten something. I wanted to see if her veil needed fixing. I wanted to give her the pearl necklace my own mother had worn on her wedding day, the one I had kept wrapped in tissue paper for 34 years, waiting for the moment I could place it into my daughter's hands and tell her that some women carry love forward, even when life tries to break them. But when I reached the first row, the small gold sign that should have said reserved for the mother of the bride was gone. In its place sat a white card with another name written in looping calligraphy: Vanessa Hale, Brandon's mother. I stood there for a few seconds, thinking maybe I had walked to the wrong side. I looked at the aisle. I looked at the altar. I looked back at the chair. It was my seat. I had chosen that seat during the rehearsal walkthrough 2 days earlier because Emily had smiled and said, "I want to see you when I walk down, Mom." That sentence had lived inside me like a warm light. Now the light went out. A young wedding planner in a beige headset hurried toward me, her face already apologizing before her mouth did. "Mrs. Whitmore," she whispered, "Emily asked us to move you to table 19 for the ceremony and reception." I heard the words, but they did not land. All at once. Table 19 was not a family table. It was near the service doors beside the speakers, close enough to the kitchen that you could hear plates stacking behind the wall. I stared at the planner until she looked down at her clipboard. "There must be a mistake," I said. My voice sounded polite. Too polite. That was the first thing I hated about myself that day. Before she could answer, Emily appeared from the bridal suite hallway in her ivory gown, glowing under the hotel lights like every dream I had ever sacrificed for her. For one breath, I forgot the chair. I saw my little girl at 7 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, running across our tiny Tampa apartment with a blanket over her head pretending it was a veil. Then she reached me, and her eyes were not soft. They were careful, managed, cold around the edges. "Mom," she said, keeping her smile fixed for the guests behind me, "please don't make a scene." I looked at the chair again. Vanessa Hale was already sitting there, perfectly still, wearing pale champagne satin and the kind of smile people use when they want witnesses, but not truth. "Emily," I whispered, "that is my seat." My daughter's jaw tightened just enough for me to see it. "It's just a seat. Just a seat." I had worked double shifts during tax season to pay for her private tutoring. I had sold my wedding band after her father died, so she could stay in the school district she loved. I had written the first deposit check for this very ballroom when Brandon said his family believed in tradition, but not unnecessary expenses. And now my place beside my daughter had been reduced to furniture. Emily leaned closer, her perfume sweet and expensive, bought with money I had given her for bridal emergencies. "Brandon's family has a certain image," she said softly. "Vanessa should be up front. It will look better." Something inside my chest went very quiet. Not broken. Not yet. Quiet. I looked down at the velvet box in my hand. My thumb pressed against the lid so hard the corner left a mark in my skin. I wanted to ask her when I had become something that looked bad in photographs. I wanted to ask if she remembered promising me I would sit where she could see me. I wanted to ask whether love had to be elegant now to count. Instead, I swallowed. I nodded once. Emily exhaled like I had finally behaved. "Thank you," she said, already turning away. "I knew you'd understand." That was the sentence that did it. Not the seat. Not Vanessa. Not table 19. It was the certainty in my daughter's voice. The certainty that I would absorb the insult, smooth my dress, sit in the back, and call it love. I walked to table 19 while the quartet kept playing. No one stopped me. No one asked why the mother of the bride was sitting near the kitchen doors. I placed the velvet box on the white tablecloth in front of me and folded my hands around it. At 3:17, my daughter took my seat. By 7:42 that evening, she would learn that a chair was not the only thing a mother could take back. I sat at table 19 with a pearl necklace still inside its velvet box and watched my daughter become a bride from the farthest acceptable distance they could place me without admitting what they had done. The service doors swung open and closed behind my chair, letting out little bursts of warm air that smelled like butter, garlic, and expensive chicken. Every time a waiter passed, he apologized under his breath, as if he knew I did not belong there but had no power to fix it. The aisle looked different from the back. Smaller. Colder. Emily stood at the entrance with her bouquet of white orchids, her veil floating behind her, and for one terrible second, I thought she might look for me. She did not. Her eyes went straight to the front row, to Vanessa Hale sitting in the chair that had been mine, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief like she had earned those tears. Brandon stood beneath the arch with that polished smile of his, the same smile he had worn the first time he called me generous after I offered to help with a venue deposit. I had mistaken manners for character. That is an expensive mistake when you're a mother. The ceremony was beautiful in the way money can make things beautiful. The flowers were perfect. The music was perfect. The sunset over the Gulf was perfect. Even the vows sounded perfect. Full of promises about loyalty and family and choosing each other every day. I sat with my hands folded around the velvet box and felt each word pass through me without staying. Family. Loyalty. Choosing. People say weddings reveal love. That is not always true. Sometimes weddings reveal hierarchy. They show you who gets placed in the light and who gets asked to disappear politely. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room rose to applaud. I rose too, because my body still remembered how to be proud of Emily even while my heart was learning to be careful with her. She walked back down the aisle on Brandon's arm, smiling at guests on both sides. When she passed my row near the kitchen doors, her smile flickered. Not with regret, with warning. Do not ruin this. Do not embarrass me. Do not make me pay for what I just did. So I smiled back. A small smile. A mother's smile. The kind that has carried fevers, tuition bills, late-night phone calls, and disappointments no child ever sees. Then the ballroom staff shifted the room for dinner, and table 19 became exactly what I had feared. I was seated with Brandon's distant coworker, 2 guests from his gym, and an elderly cousin who asked me twice how I knew the couple. I told her, I am the bride's mother. She looked at the front table, then back at me, and her face softened with the kind of pity that feels almost worse than cruelty. Across the room, Vanessa lifted her champagne glass as photographers circled her. Emily laughed beside her. Brandon leaned close to both of them. They looked like a family portrait with the original mother cropped out. I was reaching for my water glass when my purse vibrated against my knee. One message. David Morrison. My attorney. I am 10 minutes away. Do you still want me to come inside? I looked toward the head table. Vanessa was touching Emily's shoulder like she had been doing it all her life. Brandon was whispering into my daughter's ear. Emily nodded, then glanced toward me, not with love, but with calculation. I knew that look. I had seen it 3 months earlier when she first brought up the condo. My Naples condo, 1,200 square feet overlooking the marina, the one her father and I had bought when we still believed retirement would happen together. Emily had called it a new beginning for her and Brandon. She had cried at my kitchen table. She had said rent was impossible. She had said marriage was hard enough without starting buried under Florida housing prices. She had said, Mom, you are the only person I can count on. I had almost signed. The papers were still in my purse that day, folded inside a cream envelope, waiting for the right moment. Or maybe waiting for me to become foolish again. I opened David's message and typed with one finger.
Come in.
Bring everything. Then I turned my phone face down on the table and looked at the velvet box in front of me. The pearls inside had survived 3 generations of women who knew how to endure. But endurance was not the same as surrender. A few minutes later, the ballroom doors opened. David Morrison stepped inside in a gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase, his expression calm enough to frighten anyone who understood lawyers. He did not wave. He did not smile. He simply found me at table 19, nodded once, and took an empty seat beside mine. "Margaret," he said quietly, "before the speeches begin, I need to ask you one more time. Are you certain?" I looked at my daughter beneath the chandelier, glowing beside the people who had moved me to the back of my own sacrifice. Then I looked at the envelope in my purse. "No," I said. "I was uncertain for 34 years. I am certain now." David sat beside me at table 19 like a quiet line drawn on the floor. On one side was the woman I had been all my life, the mother who explained things away, who swallowed hurt before anyone noticed, who believed that love meant giving until there was nothing left to hand over. On the other side was the woman I had not yet met, the one who had finally understood that being needed was not the same as being loved. I did not become that woman in one afternoon. It took 34 years. Emily was 6 when her father, Richard, died on a rain-slick highway outside Tampa, coming home from a late construction job he had taken because Christmas was coming and our daughter wanted a pink bicycle with streamers on the handlebars. People told me I was strong at the funeral. I was not strong. I was 29 years old, standing in black shoes that pinched my toes, holding a little girl who kept asking why Daddy would not wake up, while relatives whispered about insurance, bills, and what I was going to do next. What I did next was simple. I survived. I kept our 2-bedroom apartment on Kennedy Boulevard because Emily knew the sound of the old air conditioner and the crack in the hallway tile shaped like a lightning bolt. I worked days at an insurance office and nights preparing tax returns from a card table in our living room. I learned which grocery store marked down meat on Wednesday evenings. I learned how to stretch a tank of gas for 9 days. I learned to cry in the shower because running water was the only thing loud enough to cover it. Emily never knew the half of it. That was my choice. I wanted her childhood to feel protected, not indebted. When her class went to Orlando in 5th grade, and I did not have the money, I sold the gold bracelet Richard had given me on our first anniversary. When she needed braces, I took bookkeeping work for a dentist who paid me partly in discounts. When she got accepted to the University of Florida, I refinanced the condo Richard and I had bought as our retirement dream, the little Naples place with 1,200 square feet, marina views, and a balcony where he used to say we would drink coffee when we were old. We never got old together. But I kept that condo because it was the last promise with his fingerprints on it. I used to take Emily there on summer weekends. She would stand on the balcony in bare feet, holding a glass of lemonade and say, "One day, I want a life like this." I would smile and say, "Then build one, sweetheart." I did not understand then that some children here build one and think take yours. That is the cruel part about sacrifice. If you do it quietly enough, people start mistaking it for your natural state. Emily grew up loved. She grew up praised. She grew up believing her mother would find a way, because I always had. If she forgot a science project until the night before, I drove to the 24-hour store and bought poster board. If she called from college crying because her car needed new tires, I sent money I did not have. If her first apartment fell through, I paid the deposit on another one. Each time she said, "Mom, you are the only person I can count on." I carried that sentence like a medal. Later, I would recognize it as a key she used whenever she wanted a door opened. Then Brandon came along. He was charming in the way smooth floors are charming before you realize there is nothing to hold on to. He called me Mrs. Whitmore at first, then Margaret when he wanted something, then Mom when Emily started talking about wedding checks. He had a good job in medical device sales, at least that was what he said, but there was always some delay, some commission not paid yet, some investment about to come through. Vanessa Hale wrapped all of it in elegance. She never asked directly for anything. She simply made needs sound like etiquette. A proper wedding required a coastal venue. A proper reception required open bar service. A proper young couple should begin married life somewhere beautiful, somewhere worthy of the family image. Emily absorbed those words like perfume. By the time she asked about the Naples condo, she had already learned to make greed sound like vulnerability. She came to my kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, mascara damp, voice trembling, saying she and Brandon could not start their marriage drowning in rent. She said the condo would stay in the family. She said it was what Dad would have wanted. That was when I should have stood up. Instead, I made tea. I listened. I let her cry. Because mothers are trained to hear tears before truth. At table 19, with David beside me and the cream envelope still in my purse, I finally saw the pattern clearly. I had not been invited to witness my daughter's happiness. I had been brought there to complete a transaction. The seat was only the first signature they took from me, without asking. The velvet box on the table was small enough to fit in my palm, but it carried more family than that entire ballroom.
Dark blue.
Velvet, worn thin at the corners. A tiny brass clasp that stuck if you pressed it too quickly. Inside was a strand of freshwater pearls my grandmother had bought in St. Augustine in 1951, back when she cleaned rooms at a beach motel and saved $2 a week in a coffee can hidden behind flour in the pantry. She wore them when she married my grandfather. My mother wore them when she married my father in a church basement with folding chairs and grocery store carnations. I wore them when I married Richard, standing beneath a white arch he had built himself because we could not afford to rent one. Those pearls had never belonged to the richest woman in the room. They belonged to the woman who understood what love cost. For 34 years, I kept them wrapped in tissue in the top drawer of my dresser, not because they were worth much at a jewelry counter, but because they were the one thing in my family that had passed from mother to daughter without a lawyer, a receipt, or a fight. Emily used to ask about them when she was little. She would sit cross-legged on my bed after church, still wearing her patent leather shoes, watching me put them away. "Can I wear them when I get married?" she asked once. She could not have been more than 8. I touched her cheek and said, "If you still want them, sweetheart, they will be yours." She grinned like I had promised her a crown. That memory sat beside me at table 19, more real than the strangers picking at salads around me. Earlier that afternoon, before the chair disappeared, before I understood how carefully I had been rearranged, I had gone to the bridal suite to give Emily the necklace. I had rehearsed the words in the elevator. Nothing dramatic, nothing needy, just, "Your grandmother would have loved to see you today." The suite smelled like hairspray, roses, and champagne. Bridesmaids floated around in pale blue robes. Makeup brushes tapped against counters. Someone laughed near the window. Emily stood in front of a full-length mirror while 2 women adjusted the back of her gown. She looked beautiful. I will never deny that. Pain does not erase beauty. It only teaches you that beauty can stand very close to cruelty. I waited until the others stepped aside, then held out the box. "I brought something for you," I said. Emily glanced at it, then at her reflection. "Mom, not right now. It will only take a second." I opened the lid. The pearls rested against cream satin, soft and quiet, exactly as they had on my wedding day. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Vanessa's voice drifted from the sofa behind us. "Oh, how sentimental." She said sentimental the way some people say expired. I turned and saw her sitting with one leg crossed over the other, a diamond bracelet flashing on her wrist. "They belong to my grandmother," I said. Vanessa smiled. "Of course. Very sweet. But Emily is wearing real diamonds today." Real diamonds. 2 words, polished smooth and meant to cut, without leaving fingerprints. I looked at my daughter. I waited for her to say something. Anything. She could have said, "They matter to me." She could have said, "Thank you, Mom." She could have said, "I will keep them close." Instead, Emily took the box from my hand, closed it, and placed it on the vanity between a lipstick tube and a half-empty glass of sparkling water. "Maybe later," she said. Not unkindly. That almost made it worse. Cruelty is easier to face when it has the courage to sound like itself. I stood there in my navy dress, suddenly aware that I had chosen the wrong shoes, the wrong earrings, the wrong hope. Vanessa rose and walked toward Emily with a glittering necklace in her hands, diamonds arranged like drops of ice. She fastened it around my daughter's neck while looking at me in the mirror. "There," she said. "Now she looks like a hail." Emily touched the diamonds and smiled. I understood then, but only halfway. I thought the pearls had been rejected because they were old. Later, at table 19, watching Vanessa sit in my chair beneath the soft gold light, I realized the pearls and the seat were the same insult wearing different clothes. My necklace had been replaced by Vanessa's diamonds. My chair had been replaced by Vanessa herself. They had not simply moved me. They had staged my removal. David noticed me looking at the velvet box. "Is that the necklace?" he asked quietly. I nodded. Across the room, Emily lifted her glass while the diamonds at her throat caught the chandelier light. The pearls stayed closed between my hands. For the first time in my life, I was glad I had not given them away. I need to tell you what happened before David walked into that ballroom because the seat was not the beginning. It was the confirmation. 2 hours before the ceremony, after Emily closed the velvet box and Vanessa fastened those diamonds around her neck, I stepped into the hallway outside the bridal suite with my hands empty and my chest tight. I told myself to breathe. I told myself weddings made people tense. I told myself Vanessa was rude, but rudeness did not have to become a wound unless I let it. That is what mothers do when they are trying not to see the truth. We rename disrespect until it sounds survivable. I was halfway to the elevator when I realized I had left my reading glasses on the little side table inside the suite. I almost kept walking. That is how much I wanted to avoid going back into that room. But the transfer papers were in my purse, and I knew Emily would ask me to read them later. She had been hinting for weeks that after the reception, when everyone was relaxed and happy, we could take care of the condo paperwork real quick. Real quick. That was how she described signing away the last place that still felt like Richard and me. So I turned around. The bridal suite door was not closed all the way. A thin line of light cut across the carpet. I raised my hand to knock, then stopped when I heard Vanessa's voice. It was different when she thought no one important was listening. Lower. Flatter. "The old woman is sentimental," she said. "Use that." I stood still. Not because I wanted to listen. Because my body understood danger before my pride did. Brandon answered next. "We need the condo signed tonight. My credit will not carry another mortgage, and the Naples place solves everything." Vanessa gave a soft laugh. "It solves everything if Margaret does not start asking questions." Then Emily spoke. "My daughter. My little girl with the pink bicycle and the missing front teeth." "She will sign," Emily said. "She paid for half this wedding already. She is not going to embarrass herself by saying no now." I leaned one hand against the wall. The hallway smelled like lilies and floor polish. Somewhere downstairs, guests were beginning to arrive, their voices rising through the hotel like the world had not just shifted under my feet. Brandon said, "Are you sure? She seemed weird about the papers last week." Emily sighed, irritated, not worried. "That is because Mom likes to feel included. I will cry if I have to. I will tell her Dad would want us to have it. She always folds when I bring him up. There are sentences that do not break your heart loudly. They do it with precision, quietly, like a lock turning from the inside." I stood outside that door and saw every past moment rearrange itself. The Sunday kitchen table, the damp mascara, the trembling voice, the way Emily had touched my hand and said, "Mom, you are the only person I can count on." I had thought she was reaching for me. She had been reaching for the deed. Vanessa said, "Good. And after tonight, boundaries. You cannot have her hovering around your marriage." Brandon added, "Once the condo is handled, she can visit when it works for us." Then Emily said the words I still hear when a room gets too quiet. "After tonight, I do not need her approval anymore. Not love. Not presence. Not blessing. Approval." I stepped back from the door, as if the carpet itself had moved. My reading glasses were still inside. I left them there. Some things are not worth going back for. I walked down the hallway, without knowing where my feet were taking me, and ended up in the ladies' restroom near the ballroom. It was empty, bright, and cold. I locked myself in the last stall, sat down with my purse on my lap, and pressed both hands over my mouth. I did not cry. That surprised me. For years, I cried easily. Commercials with fathers and daughters. Empty bedrooms after Emily drove back to college. Richard's birthday. Emily's birthday. Any day that reminded me love could leave and still expect you to keep serving at dinner. But in that restroom, no tears came. Only a strange calm. I took the cream envelope from my purse. Inside were the unsigned condo transfer documents Brandon's friend had prepared, documents I had been told were simple, temporary, just family helping family. My name was printed on every page like a woman being politely erased. I folded the envelope once, put it back, and called David Morrison. He had handled Richard's estate. He had warned me not to sign anything at the wedding. I had told him he worried too much. When he answered, I said, "David, I need you at the Maribel Coast Hotel before the speeches." He went quiet for half a second. "Margaret, what happened?" I looked at myself in the restroom mirror. Navy dress, silver hair, a mother of the bride with no seat and, apparently, no use after the papers were signed. "Bring the revised trust documents," I said. "Bring the revocation forms. Bring the emails I forwarded you last week. Bring everything."
His voice changed.
Professional. Steady. "Do you want me to stop the ceremony?" I looked toward the ballroom doors, where laughter spilled into the hallway and my daughter prepared to walk toward a future she planned to build on my silence. "No," I said. "I want them to finish pretending first." By the time I returned to the ballroom, the woman I had been that morning no longer fit inside my skin. She had worried about flowers. She had worried about whether Emily had eaten breakfast. She had worried that the pearls might feel old-fashioned beside the diamonds. The woman who walked back through those doors worried about none of that. She noticed details. The placement of Vanessa's purse on my former chair. The way Brandon checked his phone every few minutes. The cream envelope in my purse, still unsigned. The wedding coordinator whispering into her headset while avoiding my eyes. I did not feel powerful. That would come later. What I felt was clean. Cold, but clean. Like a window had finally been opened in a room where I had been breathing someone else's excuses for years. I walked to table 19 and sat down without looking around to see who had noticed me. A waiter offered champagne. I asked for water. My hands were steady when I lifted the glass. That surprised me more than anything. I had always imagined betrayal as something loud, something that made a person fall apart in public. But real betrayal can do the opposite. It can make every unnecessary part of you go silent. While the ceremony began, I watched Emily from the back and measured the distance between who she had been and who she had chosen to become. She walked slowly, smiling beneath the veil I had helped pay for, carrying flowers that cost more than my first car. Vanessa turned in the front row just enough for the photographer to catch her profile. Brandon's eyes shone when Emily reached him, and for a moment, I wondered if he loved her in some way. Maybe he did. People can love someone and still use another person to fund the life they want. That is what took me so long to understand. Bad behavior does not always arrive wearing a villain's face. Sometimes it arrives with thank you notes, Sunday dinners, and soft voices asking you to help just this once. The vows passed like weather. I stood when everyone stood. I sat when everyone sat. I smiled when the photographer's lens swept over the room. Not because I was pretending anymore, but because I was done giving them pieces of me to use as proof that everything was fine. When the ceremony ended, guests flowed toward the cocktail area, and Emily disappeared into photographs with Brandon, Vanessa, and the bridal party. No one called for me. The mother of the bride was not needed for family pictures. I watched from beside a tall arrangement of white roses while a photographer adjusted Vanessa's shoulder, then told Emily to lean closer. They made a beautiful photograph. That was the problem with photographs. They could frame absence as elegance. I took out my phone and saw a message from David. 15 minutes. I replied, "I will be at table 19. Then I opened my email and read again the messages I had forwarded him the week before. Emily asking whether the condo transfer could be done before the honeymoon. Brandon asking if my signature needed to be notarized. Vanessa writing, "Margaret responds better when she feels honored." I had not understood that line when I first read it. I had thought it sounded strange, maybe condescending. Now I saw it clearly. They had studied my heart like a lock they planned to pick. During cocktail hour, Emily finally came to me. She still held her bouquet. The diamonds at her throat flashed each time she moved. "Mom," she said, her smile tight, "are you okay?" I looked at her for a moment before answering. She did not ask because she cared. She asked because she needed to know whether I would behave long enough to sign. "I am fine," I said. Emily glanced at my purse. There it was. Quick, small, and unmistakable. "Good," she said. "After dinner, Brandon and I thought we could step into the office with you for a few minutes. Just to handle the condo papers before we leave tomorrow. It would mean so much to us to start our marriage settled." Settled. Another soft word, laid over something hard. I placed my hand over the velvet box on the table. "After dinner," I repeated. Her shoulders relaxed. She thought she had won. That was the first time all day I felt something close to peace. Not joy. Not revenge.
Peace.
Because for once, Emily had mistaken my silence for permission, and she was wrong. When she walked away, I did not call her back. I did not warn her. Mothers warn children when the stove is hot, when storms are coming, when roads are slick after rain. But Emily was not a child anymore. She was a grown woman in a wedding gown, choosing to turn her mother into a signature. So I let her return to the head table. I let Brandon kiss her temple. I let Vanessa raise her glass like a queen in a room she had conquered. Then, just as the salads were cleared and the first speeches were being arranged, the ballroom doors opened again. David Morrison stepped inside with his gray suit, his leather briefcase, and the calm expression of a man carrying documents that did not care, who was embarrassed by the truth. David did not sit down right away. He stopped beside table 19, placed his briefcase on the carpet near his shoes, and looked toward the head table with the kind of stillness that makes dishonest people nervous. I had known David Morrison for almost 15 years. He was not dramatic. He did not threaten. He did not raise his voice. When Richard died, David had guided me through probate with a patience I never forgot, explaining each document as if my grief had not made me slow, only wounded. He was the one who told me to put the Naples condo into a revocable trust. He was the one who said, "Margaret, someday love and paperwork may need to stand in separate rooms." I had laughed then. I was not laughing now. At the head table, Vanessa had taken the microphone. She stood beneath the chandelier with her champagne glass lifted, elegant and satisfied, the diamonds on her wrist catching the light like little warnings. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she began, her voice warm enough for strangers and sharp enough for me. "Today is about two families becoming one." I watched Emily smile. I watched Brandon place his hand over hers. I watched guests lean in, ready for the soft, polished words people expect at weddings. Vanessa turned slightly, just enough that her gaze found me near the kitchen doors. "Of course," she continued, "joining families also means understanding that roles change. Parents must learn when to step forward and when to step back." A few people chuckled politely, not because it was funny, because rooms full of well-dressed people often laugh when they are told to. Vanessa smiled wider. "Emily and Brandon have built something beautiful together, and tonight we honor the people who support that future without making it about themselves." My water glass was cold beneath my fingertips. David leaned closer, without looking at me. "Do you want me to intervene now?" he asked. I kept my eyes on Vanessa. Not yet. Because I needed to hear it all. Not for proof. David already had proof. I needed the last part of me that still wanted to excuse them to sit there and listen. Vanessa went on about grace, transition, young love, and new beginnings. Every phrase was wrapped in satin and pinned directly to my chest. Then she said, "Some of us give our children roots, and some of us give them wings. The wise ones know not to hold too tightly when it is time for them to fly." I felt the table go quiet around me. The elderly cousin beside me stopped cutting her chicken. One of Brandon's gym friends looked down at his plate. Even strangers could hear what my daughter refused to stop. Emily lowered her eyes but said nothing. That silence became louder than Vanessa's speech. It filled the ballroom. It stood on the chair that used to be mine. It sat beside me at table 19. When Vanessa finished, the applause came unevenly. Brandon stood and kissed her cheek. Emily smiled too brightly. Then the master of ceremonies took the microphone and announced that after the next toast, the couple would be stepping briefly into the hotel office for a private family matter before the cake cutting. Private family matter. I almost admired how cleanly they said it. No one in that room knew it meant papers. No one knew it meant my signature. No one knew the bride and groom planned to walk me into an office after publicly shrinking me, then ask me to hand them $1 million condo as if humiliation were simply part of the closing process. Brandon checked his watch. Emily looked toward me again. Vanessa whispered something to him, and he nodded. The trap had a schedule. That was when David picked up his briefcase and stood. "Margaret," he said quietly, "if they take you into that office, they will claim this remained private. If I speak in this room, there will be witnesses." I looked at the head table. I saw my daughter at 34, beautiful and unreachable. I saw Vanessa seated in my place. I saw Brandon waiting for my property with the patience of a man expecting delivery. Then I looked at the pearls. I placed the velvet box into my purse and closed the clasp. "Then speak in this room," I said. David nodded once. He walked toward the stage with no hurry at all. The master of ceremonies was introducing Brandon's college friend when David reached him and murmured something I could not hear. The young man blinked, confused, then handed over the microphone the way people do when authority arrives dressed in a gray suit. The first ripple moved through the room. Heads turned. Vanessa's smile froze. Brandon stood halfway from his chair. Emily's face changed before anyone said a word. She knew, not everything, but enough. David adjusted the microphone, opened his briefcase on the small cocktail table beside the stage, and removed a folder with my name typed on the tab. His voice, when it filled the ballroom, was calm, clear, and impossible to mistake. "Good evening. My name is David Morrison. I represent Margaret Whitmore, the woman seated by the kitchen doors tonight." The room did not go silent all at once. It happened in layers. First, the laughter near the bar faded. Then the silverware stopped moving. Then the string quartet lowered their bows as if even the music understood it had wandered into the wrong moment. David stood beneath the chandelier with my folder in one hand and the microphone in the other, and for the first time that day, every face in the ballroom turned toward the place where I had been hidden. Table 19. By the kitchen doors. Near the speakers. Behind the flowers no one was meant to notice. I felt the attention land on me, heavy and bright, but I did not lower my eyes. Not this time. David's voice stayed calm. "Mrs. Whitmore has asked me to clarify several legal and financial matters before any further private documents are presented to her this evening." Brandon moved first. "This is not the time," he said, stepping away from the head table. David did not look at him. "Actually, Mr. Hale, timing is precisely the concern." A murmur went through the room. Emily rose slowly, one hand touching the diamonds at her throat. Vanessa remained seated, but her smile had disappeared so completely it was hard to believe it had ever been there. David opened the folder. "For the record, Margaret Whitmore is the sole trustee and beneficiary of the Whitmore Family Trust as it relates to the Naples condominium located near the marina, valued last month at approximately $1.2 million. Someone gasped softly. I stared at the white tablecloth and listened to the number float through the room like something indecent. Money has a strange effect on people. Pain can sit in public and be ignored. Money makes everyone pay attention. David continued. That property has not been transferred. It has not been gifted. It has not been promised in any legally binding manner to Emily Whitmore Hale, Brandon Hale, or any member of the Hale family. Brandon's face reddened. That is private family business. It became less private, David said, when my client was asked to sign transfer documents at this reception after being publicly displaced from her role in the ceremony. Emily's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I could see her searching for the version of herself that cried in kitchens and got what she wanted. That version had no place to stand now. David removed another paper. As of 5:48 this evening, Mrs. Whitmore formally revoked any pending authorization related to transfer, occupancy, refinancing, collateral use, or beneficiary access involving that property. Vanessa stood then. This is outrageous. Margaret is emotional today. She clearly does not understand what is happening. David finally looked at her. Mrs. Hale, my client underwent a full capacity evaluation 6 weeks ago when we updated her estate documents. She understands exactly what is happening. The room shifted again. That was the thing about truth. Once it entered, people made room without wanting to. David held up a printed email. I would also like to address the concern of undue pressure. Mrs. Whitmore forwarded several messages to my office last week. One was sent by Mr. Hale to Emily. Brandon took a step forward. Do not read that. David paused. Then you acknowledge writing it. The sentence landed cleanly. Brandon stopped. Emily whispered his name, but it sounded more like fear than affection. David read only one line, and he read it without drama. Once she signs, we can stop pretending she matters. No one moved. No one coughed. No one reached for a glass. The words hung over the roses, over the champagne, over the cake waiting untouched near the wall. Once she signs, we can stop pretending she matters. I had heard worse in the hallway, but hearing it carried through a microphone was different. It did not hurt more. It became smaller. A cruel little sentence spoken by small people who had mistaken my love for weakness. Emily began to cry. I knew those tears. I had paid bills because of those tears. I had changed plans, written checks, forgiven sharp words, and opened doors because of those tears. But from across the ballroom, they looked different. Not softer. Not innocent. Just late. Mom, she said, her voice trembling, that is not what we meant. I stood before I knew I was going to. My chair made a quiet sound against the floor. Every eye turned to me. David lowered the microphone slightly, ready to bring it back if I asked. I did not walk quickly. There was no need. For 34 years, I had rushed whenever Emily needed me. That evening, she could wait. I crossed the ballroom past the tables, past the guests, past Vanessa in the chair that had started all of this, and stopped beside David. He offered me the microphone. I looked at my daughter and her diamonds, then at Brandon, then at the room full of people who had just heard what I was worth to them before my signature dried. I did not raise my voice. I paid for the flowers, I said. I paid for the music. I paid for part of this room. But I will not pay for my own humiliation. The silence after that was the first honest thing the wedding had given me all day. I held the microphone with both hands because I wanted the room to see they were steady. Not perfect. Not young. Not decorated with diamonds. Steady. Emily stood 10 feet away from me in the dress I had helped pay for, tears shining on her cheeks, but for the first time in her life, her tears did not move me across the room. Brandon kept looking at David as if there might still be a document he could argue with. Vanessa had lowered herself back into the front row, the chair still beneath her, the victory gone out of it. I looked at that chair only once. It seemed smaller now. Strange, how a thing can feel like the center of your world until you finally stop begging for it. I reached into my purse and took out the velvet box. The brass clasp gave its little stubborn click. The pearls lay inside, soft and pale against the satin, untouched by all the noise around them. I brought these for my daughter, I said. My voice carried farther than I expected. My grandmother wore them. My mother wore them. I wore them when I married Emily's father. I believed today was the day. I would pass them on. Emily covered her mouth. Mom, please. I looked at her gently, because gentleness was not the same as surrender.
No, Emily.
You had all day to speak to me like your mother. Now you can listen to me like an adult. The room stayed still. I lifted the necklace from the box and felt the familiar weight of it across my fingers. These pearls were never about money. They were about memory. They were about women who survived hard years without learning to become hard people. I thought I was giving my daughter a piece of our family. But family is not something you perform in photographs. It is something you honor when no one important is watching. Emily's tears came faster. Brandon reached for her arm, but she pulled away from him, not dramatically, just enough for everyone close to the head table to notice. Vanessa said my name under her breath, sharp and embarrassed. I did not answer her. David stood beside me, folder closed now. He had done his part. The rest was mine. I turned the necklace around my own neck and fastened it slowly. My fingers found the clasp on the second try. When the pearls settled against my skin, I felt my mother, my grandmother, and the younger woman I used to be before grief and motherhood taught me to measure my worth by how much I could give away. I looked at Emily. The condo stays in the trust. My estate documents stay as revised. You have been removed from financial authority, beneficiary access, and every account where love was mistaken for permission. The words were not loud, but they were final. Emily whispered, "Are you cutting me off?" I breathed in once. I am cutting off the part of my life where disrespect gets rewarded because it comes from someone I raised. That was when the first guest stood. It was the elderly cousin from table 19, the one who had asked how I knew the couple.
She did not clap.
She simply picked up her purse and walked out. Then another guest stood. Then a couple near the bar. Not everyone left. Life is not a movie, and shame does not empty a ballroom all at once. But enough people moved for the truth to have footsteps. Brandon tried to speak to David near the stage, asking about options, timelines, whether anything could be reconsidered after emotions settled. David answered in the same calm voice he had used all night. "There are no wedding reception signatures to collect, Mr. Hale." Vanessa stared at the floor. Emily stared at me. And I saw, beneath the makeup and the diamonds, my little girl for 1 second. Not innocent. Not erased of what she had done. Just young in the worst way, realizing too late that mothers are not permanent furniture. "Mom," she said again, softer this time. "Can we talk?" I wanted to say yes. That was the old reflex. The ancient one. The one that had kept me awake through fevers, tuition deadlines, broken hearts, and every crisis Emily brought home wrapped in need. But love without boundaries had brought me to table 19. I would not let it drive me there twice. "Not tonight," I said. Her face crumpled, but I did not move toward her. I handed the microphone back to David and walked down from the small stage. No one blocked my way. No one asked me to sit in the back. The service doors opened near table 19 as I passed, and warm kitchen air rolled out, smelling of butter and garlic, and plates being cleared from a celebration that had become something else entirely. I picked up my purse, left the unsigned papers inside it, and walked toward the ballroom exit. At the door, I heard Emily call after me, "Mom, wait." I stopped, but I did not turn around right away. For 34 years, I had waited. In school pickup lines. In hospital rooms. Beside phones. Outside apartments. At kitchen tables, with tea going cold while my daughter decided how much of me she needed. Finally, I looked back. "I waited for you all my life, Emily," I said. "Tonight, I am done waiting." Then I stepped into the hotel hallway. The ocean was dark beyond the glass, and the Florida night smelled like salt and rain. David walked beside me, without speaking. He did not need to. In my purse were the documents that protected my home. Around my neck were the pearls that had returned to the woman who understood their worth.
I did not take my seat back that night.
I took my place back in my own life.